As much as I love this game, I think Tears of the Kingdom's greatest weakness is its story. The quality of its storytelling does not match the quality of its game design. To demonstrate the fundamental flaw in Tears of the Kingdom's story, I want to talk about two other games in the series, Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, because these are two games that did something really well with their storylines that Tears of the Kingdom completely bungled, or more accurately, that Tears of the Kingdom didn't even attempt to do in the first place. Let's start with Twilight Princess. I think Twilight Princess has the best story in any Zelda game, and that's because of Midna. When you first meet her, Midna is this mysterious but powerful, impish creature. She is openly manipulating Link to achieve her own selfish purposes. Midna has her own personal goals and interests outside of the main plotline. At the start of the game, she doesn't care about Ganondorf, she doesn't care about Hyrule, she doesn't care about Link, and she doesn't care about Princess Zelda. Midna is a character who has a life independent from the plot of the game. She doesn't feel like she only exists to serve this plot. But far more important than that, Midna is a character who grows, who develops over the course of the story. She and Link grow closer. She becomes more compassionate, more sympathetic. Instead of just using others for her own ends, she begins fighting to protect others. She begins to care. By the end, she is willing to sacrifice her own life to protect Link and Zelda. And something else that makes Midna an interesting character is her relationship with Zant, the secondary villain in the game. In some ways, Midna and Zant are very similar. They care about some of the same things. They both are members of a tribe banished to the Twilight Realm for the crimes of their ancestors. They both still resent the people of Hyrule for what was done to their tribe. So, when Midna confronts and defeats Zant, thematically that also means she gets to confront and defeat that resentment in herself, that corrosive bitterness that eats away at her empathy. Her battle with Zant isn't just a generic battle between good and evil. In some small way, it's also a battle between herself and herself, and that's the kind of confrontation that really good stories are made out of. Midna begins the story as a character who uses others to achieve her own ends. She ends the story as a character who is willing to sacrifice everything, including herself, to protect everyone. Next, let's look at Skyward Sword. My favorite character in Skyward Sword is Groose. Groose is this pompous, ridiculous, clownish, over-the-top bully whose pathetic and stupid schemes constantly blow up in his face. He also has a huge crush on Zelda, and she is pretty unimpressed with his bullying and grandstanding. At the start of the game, he is a fun character, but also pretty cartoonish and shallow. He is the generic bully. He has none of the mystery or the drama of a Midna. But as the story progresses, Groose reveals himself to possess surprising character depth. His worldview gets completely shattered, first by the disappearance of Zelda, who he genuinely did care about, and then later when he discovers that there's a whole surface world that exists beneath his Sky Island home, a surface world that is under threat. Groose isn't the kind of one-note, shallow character who just blunders along, unchanging no matter what is happening around him. He's a more complex character who changes in response to changes around him. Losing Zelda breaks his heart, discovering the surface world breaks his confidence. But then, in an impressive turn, he manages to pick up the pieces of his life and he chooses to help, to be better than the clownish bully he began the story as. By the end of the game, he's transformed from a bully into a hero. Again, this is meaningful character growth. I'm someone who is obsessed with stories, and in particular, I'm obsessed with why we are drawn to certain kinds of stories, certain kinds of characters. We, everyone, all human beings everywhere, are deeply enamored with stories about flawed characters who grow and change and become better. I think the reason for this is that we are flawed, all of us, and we all want to be better. We all want to believe that we can change. Stories about characters who grow speak to a deep desire within all of us to change who we are. That's why characters like Midna and Groose can be so compelling. Their journeys are a narrative reflection of the kind of journey we want to travel ourselves. The absence of this kind of character growth is the fundamental flaw in the story of of Tears of the Kingdom. This game's characters feel completely static. None of the main characters have any real flaws, so when they confront the villain, they can't thematically confront anything within themselves, because they are all already perfect from the start. Compare Princess Zelda's story in Tears of the Kingdom to her story in Breath of the Wild. In Breath of the Wild, Princess Zelda was a character who had interests and motivations outside of the main plotline. She had personality. She wasn't just dealing with defeating Ganondorf in every single one of her cutscenes. She was also a researcher, someone with a deep interest in history. A huge nerd, really. We got some scenes of her just nerding out about her interests. Princess Zelda in Breath of the Wild began her journey as a flawed character. She could not awaken her magical powers because she didn't understand that the only way to awaken those powers was to fight for someone else, not for duty, but because she cared deeply for the people around her enough to want to protect them. When she finally does awaken her powers, that's proof of her character growth. Now look at her story in Tears of the Kingdom. What character flaw does Princess Zelda have in this game? What flaw does she overcome by the end of the story? Because I don't see any at all. In Tears of the Kingdom, Princess Zelda is a static character. She does experience some dramatic happenings, but her character is not meaningfully changed by them. Her biggest scene in the game is when she sacrifices everything to transform into a dragon and give Link a chance to defeat Ganondorf. But as far as I can tell, Princess Zelda would have been just as willing to make that sacrifice in the first minute of the game. While it is an effectively crafted scene, in the sense that it is emotional and meaningful, it's not a change in character. In Tears of the Kingdom, she was always willing to make sacrifices for the people she cared about. And another problem is Ganondorf. What does Zelda confront in herself when she confronts Ganondorf? By defeating Ganondorf, does she or Link or any of the sages really prove anything about themselves deep down inside? Prove anything to themselves in the same way that Midna did when she defeated Zant, when she proved that she cared more about helping everyone than she cared about continuing to harbor an ages-old resentment against the Kingdom of Hyrule. To be fair to the game, both Tulin and Sidon have small character arcs that they do complete. Tulin goes from trying to do everything by himself to learning to work with others. Sidon learns to trust and rely on his fiancée Yona. But these both happen too quickly, and they're such a small part of the game. Tears of the Kingdom needs a character arc that is as big as its plotline, and it doesn't have one. As a result, its storyline feels static, flat, even boring. Tears of the Kingdom's story problems are character problems. I think the game's story does have some other big problems too, for example, a lack of detail. By the end of the game, I felt like I didn't really know anything about the Zonai, or anything about Rauru, or why he founded Hyrule, or even how he founded Hyrule, or even what his Hyrule looked like. There were just so few details about any of these things, or anything really. I felt like there was a lack of detail in every aspect of this game's story, lore, and world building. I also feel like telling the story out of order didn't work as well here as it did back in Breath of the Wild. In Breath of the Wild, you already knew the major beats of the story basically right from the start. The rise of Calamity Ganon, the destruction of Hyrule, the death of the champions. The memories just fill in the details in between these big events. It didn't really matter what order the player learned those details in. In Tears of the Kingdom, the game hides the major beats of the story, like Zelda becoming a dragon. But if you watch the memories in the wrong order, the entire thing can get spoiled for you right from the start. Once I figured out the major beats of the story for myself, watching more memories felt like a waste of time. And what felt like an even bigger waste of time was the amount of repetition in this game's cutscenes. There is no excuse for each sage having an identical cutscene that plays when you complete their quest lines. It's boring, it's pointless. How does something like this make it into the final version of a game that is this good? Surely the developers don't think anyone wants to watch it the exact same. long and boring cutscene 4 different times. But I think that even with all those flaws, the game could have still had a compelling story if Princess Zelda's character had experienced some kind of meaningful growth over the course of the story. If she had begun the game with some kind of flaw, and then through her experiences in the past, she learned to overcome that flaw, to defeat Ganondorf only by overcoming something within herself first. The real problem with the stories in all of these games is that Link is hopeless as a main character. He simply doesn't have enough character. He has never had character flaws. As expressive as his facial expressions are, he doesn't really have that much of a personality. There's an obvious solution here. Make Princess Zelda the main character in the next game. Princess Zelda is a character with flaws, at least sometimes. She is a character with a life and interests outside of the main plotline, but Nintendo have shown themselves totally and completely unwilling to either remove Link as the main character or to give him a voice and personality and character flaws. As a result, the stories in Legend of Zelda games are always going to be handicapped, because their main character might as well be a cardboard box for all the actual character he has. That's why games like Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword have to move the focus of their stories away from the brick wall that is Link and onto much more dynamic characters like Midna and Groose. Characters who are allowed to speak, allowed to be flawed, allowed to grow. Tears of the Kingdom tried to move its plot focus onto Princess Zelda, but she is simply too static of a character this time around to hold up the weight of the entire story on her own.